The first time I saw Karen climb my fence, I thought I was hallucinating from the heat. It was a dry June afternoon, the kind where the air shimmers over the pasture and the bulls flick their tails lazily at flies. I was in the barn repairing a cracked trough when I heard the metallic rattle of my gate latch, followed by the unmistakable squeak of sneakers on my old cedar fence. I looked up and there she was, HOA Vice President Karen Reynolds, in a floral sundress and wedge sandals, hauling herself over my fence like she was escaping a zombie apocalypse. Only there weren't any zombies, just a field full of 1-ton black Angus bulls watching her with the dull curiosity of creatures who hadn't yet decided whether she was a snack, a threat, or just another idiot who wandered in. For a second I didn't move. I just watched her dust off her dress, fix her sun hat, and march straight across my pasture like she owned the place. That woman had the posture of someone who thought the laws of nature, and of property, didn't apply to her. Karen and I had a long and painful history. My ranch sat just outside the suburban sprawl of the Willow Creek Estates HOA, a neighborhood that sprouted up like a fungus 10 years ago. I was grandfathered out of their jurisdiction, but that didn't stop Karen from acting like she was queen of everything within a 2-mile radius. The HOA board had spent years sending me friendly notices about my barn being unsightly, my tractor being visible from the main road, and my rooster allegedly disturbing residents' peaceful mornings. I never responded. They couldn't enforce a thing. That drove Karen insane. She loved control the way most people love chocolate, and I was the one guy she couldn't control. I walked out of the barn and called to her, "Karen, you lost or just suicidal today?" She spun around like she'd been caught sneaking cookies from the jar. "Oh, Mr. Carter," she said, voice dripping with false sweetness. "I just came to take a look at that drainage ditch you've been diverting. It's causing pooling near the HOA property line." I laughed because that pooling was a natural pond that had existed long before Willow Creek was built. But Karen had convinced herself that everything in sight was part of her suburban empire. "You could have called," I said. "Or maybe knocked on my door like a normal person instead of hopping a fence into a bull pasture." She glanced around at the animals and sniffed. "Your gate was locked. I didn't want to bother you, and frankly, someone needs to ensure these creatures are properly contained." Right on cue, Big Red, the oldest bull, massive and territorial, snorted and took a few slow steps toward her. Karen froze. "They're friendly if you don't startle them," I said. She shot me a look that could curdle milk. "These animals are dangerous. This is precisely what I've been talking about at the HOA meetings. Livestock shouldn't be this close to family neighborhoods." I shrugged. "Good thing I'm not in your neighborhood, then." Big Red gave another snort, louder this time, lowering his head just a bit. Karen took a cautious step back. "Call them off," she ordered. "He's not a dog, Karen," I said. "He doesn't really respond to commands unless they come from a bucket of feed." She huffed and crossed her arms. "Well, I'll be filing an official complaint. You'll be hearing from the HOA." "Can't wait," I said, grinning. Then Big Red decided he'd had enough of small talk. He took a couple of heavy steps forward, each thud echoing through the ground. Karen's eyes went wide, and before I could say a word, she screamed and bolted toward the fence. Bulls don't usually charge unless provoked, but all that shrieking and flapping was enough to get the rest of the herd moving. I watched in disbelief as she ran, sandals flying off, hat tumbling behind her, while 3 bulls began to trot after her just to see what the noise was about. She hit the fence and tried to climb, but her dress caught on a nail, ripping clean up the back. I ran over, trying not to laugh, and helped her over before any of the bulls got too curious. She landed on the other side, red-faced and panting. "You could have been killed," I said, leaning on the fence. "You should really stay on your side of it." She pointed a trembling finger at me. "This isn't over." It never is, I thought. Karen stormed off toward her silver SUV parked by the roadside, her phone already in hand. I knew she'd be calling the sheriff, the county, the HOA, or maybe God himself to file a complaint. Sure enough, by dinner time, a county deputy drove up my gravel road. He was laughing before he even stepped out of the car. "Got a report about bulls chasing a trespasser?" he said, barely keeping a straight face. I told him exactly what happened, showed him the broken fence latch Karen had climbed through, and he just shook his head. "You'd think after last time she'd learn." "Last time?" I asked. "She called us 2 months ago because your rooster was harassing her yoga class. We told her to close her window." I chuckled. "Persistent woman." He smirked. "Persistence, one word for it. Anyway, you're in the clear. We already warned her about trespassing last year. She keeps this up, we'll fine her." I figured that would be the end of it, but Karen didn't operate like normal people. The next morning, I found a fresh envelope taped to my mailbox. Inside was a letter on official HOA letterhead demanding that I remove my hazardous animals or face legal consequences. The kicker? She'd CC'd the entire HOA board, the county zoning office, and the Willow Creek Family Safety Committee, whatever that was. I just laughed and threw it on the counter. But then I noticed something else: tire tracks near the pasture gate. Not mine. Not from any of my neighbors, either. Someone had been back there last night. I checked the trail cam I'd installed months ago for coyotes, and sure enough, the footage showed Karen, flashlight in hand, pointing her phone at my fence and taking pictures like she was gathering evidence for a trial. I stood there watching her trip over a bucket and nearly fall face-first into a cow patty. I couldn't help it, I laughed until my sides hurt. Still, the trespassing wasn't funny anymore. She wasn't just harassing me. She was walking into dangerous territory at night around large animals that didn't take kindly to strangers. I decided to play it smart. I printed a big sign and hung it on the gate. "Warning: livestock are dangerous. Trespassers will be fed to the bulls," joking, mostly. That should have scared her off, or at least any sane person. But Karen wasn't sane, she was on a mission. I didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. Her obsession with my pasture was about to spiral into something that would have the entire county talking, and the HOA begging me for mercy. Because when you trespass into a man's pasture twice, it's stupidity. But when you do it again after being chased by bulls the first time, well, that's when the bulls start to get ideas of their own. 2 mornings after the fence incident, I woke to the distant rumble of voices and engines down by the road. My first thought was that the county had sent a crew to grade the gravel stretch again, but when I stepped out onto the porch with my coffee, I saw something that made me laugh into my mug. There were 3 SUVs parked bumper to bumper along my property line, all with shiny HOA stickers on their windshields, and in the middle of them stood Karen, clipboard in hand, flanked by 2 men in polos and khakis who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. One was the HOA president, Greg, or Gregory, as Karen liked to insist, whose primary personality trait was avoiding conflict. The other, I didn't recognize, but judging by the way he was measuring the fence with a laser rangefinder, I guessed he was some sort of code inspector. I walked down the dirt path, boots crunching over gravel, and called out, "Morning, folks. You lost again?" Karen spun, all business now, her expression rehearsed. "We're here for an inspection," she declared. "Your fence line encroaches on HOA land, and the board has received multiple complaints about unsafe animals too close to residential homes." I leaned on the gate. "Unsafe animals? You mean my bulls? They were here before your houses existed." Greg cleared his throat softly. "We just need to verify property lines," he said, avoiding eye contact. Karen filed a formal request to ensure no violations are occurring. The inspector looked up. "We're only confirming the coordinates, sir." I nodded slowly. "So let me get this straight. You're standing on county land, outside your HOA jurisdiction, inspecting a fence that's legally on my property, to see if my bulls, who have their own registered ear tags and health certificates, are too close to your homes built illegally near agricultural zoning." Karen's nostrils flared. "No need to get defensive," she said. We're just looking out for the safety of our community. I smiled. And I'm looking out for the safety of anyone dumb enough to climb that fence again. She bristled. Are you threatening me? No, ma'am, I said. I'm warning you. Bulls don't file paperwork before they charge. Greg stepped in quickly, hands up. Let's all calm down. We'll take measurements and be gone. I watched them fuss with their gadgets for an hour, muttering over GPS points. Finally, the inspector turned to Karen and said something she clearly didn't want to hear. Fence is well within legal boundary. Nothing to report. Karen's face twitched like she'd bitten into a lemon. That can't be right, she snapped. Check it again. The man sighed. Ma'am, the county survey marker's right here. There's no encroachment. She tried again. What about livestock containment laws? He frowned. The animals are enclosed and tagged. There's no violation. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Karen shoved her clipboard under her arm and stormed toward her car. This isn't over, she shouted, slamming the door. Greg gave me a weary shrug before following her. The inspector just muttered, "Good luck with that one," and drove off. I thought that was the end of the circus for the day, but around sunset, as I was feeding the bulls, I spotted something shiny tied to the fence post. Another envelope. Inside was a notice of intent to sue, written on official HOA letterhead, accusing me of reckless endangerment, emotional distress, and defamation. It was so absurd I laughed out loud. The last time someone tried to sue me over cows was back in 2004 when a city couple rented the adjacent property and claimed my bulls were causing anxiety. The judge tossed it out in 2 minutes flat. That night, I sat on my porch, watching lightning bugs drift over the field, and I started thinking maybe it was time to push back. Not out of anger, but out of principle. Karen needed to learn boundaries, both physical and metaphorical. I made a few calls the next morning to my cousin, who worked for the county's agricultural department. By noon, I had 2 new laminated warning signs and an official letter confirming that my pasture was designated livestock land, fully compliant with zoning and containment laws. I also ordered a camera upgrade, one that could send motion alerts directly to my phone. It didn't take long for those alerts to go off. 2 nights later, around 10 p.m., I got a ping, movement near the pasture gate. I opened the live feed, and sure enough, there she was again. Karen, flashlight in one hand, notebook in the other, whispering into her phone. She was talking about collecting photographic evidence and proving a public hazard. Then she did something incredibly stupid. She unlatched the gate and stepped inside. I watched, jaw tightening, as she wandered into the pasture like a detective on a crime scene. The bulls, curious as ever, started drifting toward her in the dark, their heavy shapes just visible in the night vision feed. I hit record. She stopped near Big Red's trough, crouched, and snapped a few photos, just in time for Big Red to emerge from the shadows. Even through the camera, I could see her freeze, light trembling in her hand. Big Red snorted once, twice, then started walking toward her, slow and deliberate. Karen's whisper turned into a shriek as she sprinted for the gate, tripped over the latch, and barely tumbled out before slamming it shut behind her. The bulls stopped at the fence, unimpressed, but I could see the fear on her face even through the grainy footage. I saved the video, uploaded it to a secure drive, and went to bed smiling. The next day, I printed a still frame from the footage, Karen mid-sprint, flashlight flying, and taped it to her HOA letter with a note. Smile for the camera. Trespassers make great documentaries. I folded it into an envelope and left it at her community mailbox. I didn't hear from her for 3 days. But then, one evening, a man in a cheap suit showed up at my porch holding a business card that read, Community Legal Advisor. He introduced himself as Mr. Rowe, claiming to represent the HOA in an informal mediation. I invited him to sit. He explained that Karen had suffered severe emotional distress from a hostile interaction with dangerous livestock, and wanted a formal apology plus a commitment to relocate the animals farther from the HOA perimeter. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my drink. She climbed my fence. Twice, I said. I have her on video both times. Ro looked uneasy. Even so, she feels unsafe. Good, I said. Maybe she'll stay on her side of the fence. He sighed. Mr. Carter, these disputes can get messy. She's influential on the board. I leaned forward. Tell her this. The next time she steps foot in my pasture, I won't call the sheriff. I'll call animal control and report a stray. He blinked. A stray? Yeah, I said, grinning. A lost suburban mammal with a tendency to wander into restricted areas. He didn't find that funny, but I did. He left without shaking my hand. That night, I got another alert from the camera, but this time it wasn't Karen. It was 2 deputies. They checked the gate, looked around, and drove off. I guessed Karen had reported me for threats or some nonsense. Sure enough, the next morning, Sheriff Daniels called me personally. Carter, he said, trying not to laugh, she's filed a complaint saying your bulls stalked her. Do bulls stalk, Sheriff? I asked. Not unless they're planning to charge her credit card, he said. Don't worry, we're closing it out. For a week, things quieted down. The bulls grazed peacefully. I rebuilt part of the fence and pretended life was normal again. Then, late Saturday morning, I heard a truck horn blaring outside my gate. When I got there, Karen was standing beside a flatbed truck with a large wooden crate and a small TV crew, 2 people with cameras and a woman holding a microphone. What in the world? I muttered. Karen turned, beaming like a game show host. Good morning, Mr. Carter, she said loudly, gesturing to the camera. We're filming a segment for the Willow Creek Community Watch channel about local safety hazard. You'll be featured. Featured? I said. You mean ambushed? She ignored me. We're here to demonstrate how close your bulls are to residential property lines. The cameraman zoomed in on the fence as she dramatically pointed. See how flimsy this barrier is? One push and... Before she could finish, Big Red, who'd been lounging near the trough, lifted his head and started walking toward the noise. Karen froze mid-sentence. The cameraman whispered, he's moving this way. The bull snorted and picked up pace, his massive frame filling the lens. Karen shrieked, the camera wobbled, and everyone bolted for the road. The truck driver was laughing so hard he nearly fell over. I couldn't help myself. I waved at the retreating camera crew and said, You got your action shot, right? Karen's reply was drowned out by the sound of the truck peeling away. By sunset, the video was already online, posted by someone from the HOA group, I guessed. The clip of Karen screaming as the bull approached had gone mildly viral in local circles, titled HOA Lady vs. Bull. Guess who won? I didn't share it, but I didn't have to. By morning, the county Facebook page was flooded with comments. Half the town thought it was hilarious. The other half demanded to know why Karen was trespassing again. I poured myself another coffee and sat back to enjoy the chaos. Because for once, Karen's need for control had finally backfired in front of an audience that wasn't afraid to laugh at her. And I had a feeling she wasn't going to take that humiliation lying down. 3 days after the video of Karen's safety inspection gone wrong started circulating online, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Friends, neighbors, and even a few strangers sent me links, laughing about the clip. Local news picked it up for their Community Curiosities segment, running it right after a story about a lost dog that had learned to ride a skateboard. Karen's terrified sprint had become the talk of the county. The comments were brutal. People called her Bull Magnet Barbie and Queen of the Fence Jumpers. Normally, I would have felt bad for anyone being roasted like that, but Karen had dug her own grave with a gold-plated shovel. Still, I expected her to disappear for a while, lick her wounds, and move on. That would have been the reasonable thing to do. But Karen wasn't built for reason. She was built for vengeance dressed as righteousness. It started small. The HOA's patrol car began parking by my gate twice a day, headlights aimed at the pasture like they were keeping watch for livestock rebellions. Then, one morning, my mail vanished. I found the carrier parked a block away, apologizing profusely. "They told me to stop delivering here," he said. "Said there was a pending code violation." I laughed out loud. "Code violation? I live outside their jurisdiction." He shrugged helplessly. "Talk to the post office." When I did, they confirmed no official hold had been placed. So someone had impersonated an HOA representative and told the carrier a fake story. I didn't need to guess who. By day 5, Karen's campaign had gone digital. The Willow Creek Community Facebook group, normally a place for garage sales and lost cat photos, was filled with posts about reckless livestock owners endangering families. Every comment came from suspiciously new accounts with names like Neighborhood Dad 47 and Concerned Citizen WE. The posts all used the same phrasing: unacceptable rural negligence. It was so transparently Karen's language that I almost admired the effort. Almost. I could have ignored it, but then I got an email from the county's zoning office requesting clarification of livestock boundaries. Karen had actually filed an official complaint, complete with doctored photos that made my pasture fence look like it was falling apart. That was the last straw. I drove into town the next morning and walked straight into the zoning office, a place that smelled like paper and regret. The clerk, an older woman named Ellen, smiled when she saw me. "Let me guess, HOA trouble again?" "You could say that," I replied. I explained everything. The trespassing, the video, the fake delivery hold, and now the doctored photos. Ellen frowned. "She's wasting everyone's time. I'll flag her file for harassment." Then she leaned in conspiratorially. "You didn't hear it from me, but the sheriff's office has an open file on her already, multiple nuisance reports." That perked my mood right up. "Appreciate the tip," I said. "Can I get a written confirmation that my property meets every zoning requirement?" "Absolutely," she said, printing out a stamped certification on county letterhead. When I got home, I decided to take a different approach. Fighting Karen head-on only fueled her. What she couldn't stand was being ignored, or worse, mocked. So I built a little something by the gate, a 6-foot wooden post with a metal plaque I engraved myself that read, "Karen's Crossing, established 2025, home of the legendary fence incident." I even added a small motion sensor speaker that mooed whenever someone walked past. It was petty, sure, but deeply satisfying. By evening, cars were slowing down to take photos. I didn't have to wait long for the explosion. At exactly 7:42 p.m., my camera pinged. Karen's white Lexus pulling up in a cloud of dust. She stormed up to the gate, saw the sign, and went redder than a sunburned tomato. "This is harassment," she screamed toward the pasture. "Remove this immediately." I waved from the porch. "Can't hear you over the applause, Karen." The speaker triggered again, another loud moo. She threw her hands up, screamed something incoherent, and sped off. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Greg, the HOA president, sounding like a man trapped between two hurricanes. "Carter, I'm begging you," he said. "Please take the sign down. She's threatening to file a defamation suit." I chuckled. "Defamation? It's commemorative art. Besides, truth is an absolute defense." He groaned. "You're not helping." "Oh, I am," I said. "I'm helping her build character." Then I hung up. By morning, I discovered that Karen had retaliated with paperwork, again. This time she'd reported my bulls as public safety threats to the State Agricultural Board. They sent out an inspector named Luke, a broad-shouldered guy with mud-stained boots and a dry sense of humor. "So, I hear your cows are plotting to overthrow suburbia," he said as he shook my hand. I led him through the pasture, where Big Red and the others were grazing peacefully, unimpressed by bureaucratic visits. Luke took one look around and said, "Yup, looks fine to me. Fences in good shape, animals are healthy, no violations." Then he smirked. "You know she called us last month about your rooster too?" I heard, I said. At this point, I'm half expecting her to call NASA about my weather vane interfering with satellites. He laughed, wrote up a clean report, and said, "Want me to send her a copy? I like watching HOA people implode." "Please do," I said. That afternoon, I saw her again. This time standing by her car at the far corner of the HOA boundary, binoculars in hand, watching my pasture like she was waiting for the bulls to commit a crime. I didn't confront her. I just went about my chores, knowing every minute of me ignoring her was eating her alive. The next day, though, I woke to something new: bright orange cones lined along the dirt road, and a brand new sign staked near the HOA entrance. Private access, authorized residents only. She'd actually tried to block the public road leading to my property. That crossed a line. I called the county road commissioner, a man named Don who'd known me since childhood. He laughed so hard I thought he'd choke. "She blocked a county road," he said. "Tell her to pack those cones before I send a grader through 'em." By lunchtime, a crew arrived with a front loader, scooping up her cones and dumping them in a neat pile by her mailbox. I watched from the porch as Karen stormed out in her robe, shouting something about property rights, while Don just waved and drove off. I thought that might calm things down, but Karen didn't know how to lose gracefully. That evening, I got an anonymous email titled, "Your bulls are not safe." It contained grainy photos of someone standing near my fence at night with what looked like a bag of feed. The caption read, "Wouldn't it be terrible if someone let them out?" I felt my stomach twist, not from fear, but anger. This wasn't funny anymore. I forwarded the email straight to the sheriff, along with my trail cam footage showing movement near the same time stamp. Sheriff Daniels called me 20 minutes later. "We're on it," he said. "She's crossed into criminal territory now." Sure enough, the next morning, 2 deputies showed up at Karen's door with a warning. They didn't arrest her, but they made it clear that tampering with livestock was a felony. Karen tried to spin it, claiming I'd fabricated the evidence. But the timestamps matched her security lights turning on that same night. Daniels told her if she set foot past the property line again, he'd personally escort her to county jail. For 2 glorious weeks there was silence. No patrol cars, no emails, no Facebook posts. Just peace, the kind that feels suspicious. I used the time to reinforce the gate, add better lighting, and build a new shelter for the bulls. But peace never lasts long when someone like Karen's involved. The next storm came from a direction I didn't expect: a public safety meeting hosted by the HOA. Greg texted me an invite, which I ignored. The next morning, I found out why I should have gone. Karen had invited local reporters and presented a slideshow titled, "When Livestock Threatens Suburban Harmony," complete with photos of my bulls, taken without permission, the viral video, and a few creative statistics about injuries caused by farm animals each year. It was pure theater, and it worked. Within a day, the news spread again. People who'd laughed before now wondered if I really kept aggressive bulls too close to homes. I got side eyes at the feed store and even a call from the local school board asking if I could minimize noise during bus routes. Karen had shifted tactics from confrontation to reputation warfare. That's when I realized the final showdown was coming, not over fences, not over signs, but over public opinion. And if she wanted a war of narratives, she'd picked the wrong storyteller to mess with. Because unlike Karen, I didn't need to scream at cameras or stage pity plays. I had facts, video evidence, and half the county already on my side. She thought she could win this with gossip and dramatic. But by the time I was done, even the HOA board would wish they'd built their homes somewhere far, far away from my bull's pasture. The morning after Karen's public safety meeting, I knew she'd gone too far when I stopped by the local diner for breakfast, and the waitress, who'd served me eggs and black coffee every Sunday for 8 years, leaned across the counter and whispered, "You're not really keeping killer bulls out there, are you?" That's when I realized she'd succeeded in planting a seed of doubt. The video of her running had made people laugh, but now she'd twisted it into a warning story, portraying herself as the victim of a reckless farmer whose animals charged without provocation. The narrative had shifted, and Karen was winning the sympathy of the uninformed. For someone who thrived on control, she knew how to manipulate the court of public opinion like a seasoned politician. I spent the rest of the morning fielding phone calls from concerned townsfolk and county officers verifying reports that aggressive livestock had escaped. Of course, no such thing had happened. My bulls were safely penned, grazing lazily as ever. But perception was a powerful weapon, and Karen was wielding it with surgical precision. By noon, I decided to pay her a visit. I wasn't going to shout or argue. I wanted to look her in the eye and make it clear that her campaign of lies was about to backfire spectacularly. She was in her front yard when I arrived, arranging flower pots while pretending to ignore the camera crew from a small local news outlet setting up across the street. When she finally noticed me, her smile was brittle. "Oh, Mr. Carter. Here to apologize publicly, I hope?" She called out loud enough for the camera's microphone to catch. I walked right up to her white picket fence. "Not exactly," I said. "I came to let you know you're on very thin ice. You've been caught trespassing, lying to county officials, tampering with mail delivery, and now you're defaming me on television. You're out of moves." She smirked. "You can't intimidate me. The community deserves to know about the dangers next door." I tilted my head. "You mean the dangers of you breaking the law?" She flinched. The camera crew didn't know what to do. They kept filming as if waiting for a confession. I pulled a small USB drive from my pocket and held it up. "This has footage of you entering my pasture at night, twice. And the sheriff already has copies. Keep playing games, and next time you won't be facing a lawsuit, you'll be facing criminal charges." For the first time, she hesitated, her eyes darting toward the cameras. Then, quick as a snake, she switched gears. "See," she cried dramatically. "He's threatening me again, on my own property." The cameraman's jaw dropped. Ma'am, he didn't," but she cut him off. "You all saw it. This is harassment." I smiled calmly. "That's fine," I said. "I'll be sure to show the full, unedited footage at the town hall next week." That froze her mid-performance. "Town hall?" she repeated. "Oh, you didn't know?" I said. "The county invited me to speak about rural property rights. You're welcome to attend. Maybe you'll learn the difference between pasture and playground." Then I tipped my hat and walked away, leaving her fuming in silence. 2 days later, the fallout began. Sheriff Daniels called me again, this time laughing so hard he had to pause mid-sentence. "You're on TV, Carter," he said. "They aired the interview, and she looks like she's auditioning for a soap opera." I turned on the news and nearly spat out my drink. The segment showed Karen dramatically recounting her trauma, but then they cut to footage of her climbing my fence, flashlight in hand, from the same video I'd given to the county for evidence. The news anchor's voice was deadpan. While Ms. Reynolds alleges she was chased by bulls, video evidence suggests she may have entered the pasture voluntarily. The camera cut to a clip of her screaming and sprinting as Big Red lazily followed. The entire piece ended with a quote from Sheriff Daniels: "If you trespass into a bullpen, you can't be shocked when you meet a bull." By the next morning, the HOA group page was in open revolt. Half the residents accused Karen of embarrassing them, the other half claimed it was a conspiracy. Greg, the weary HOA president, called me around noon. "Carter," he groaned, "you've got to understand she's out of control. She's talking about filing restraining orders, ethics complaints, even hiring private security for the neighborhood." I chuckled. "Tell her to hire someone with a cattle prod. Maybe they can protect her from her own stupidity." He sighed. "Just try not to escalate, all right? The board's already considering removing her." That made me pause. "Removing her?" I asked. "From the HOA board?" "From the HOA entirely," he admitted. "If we can get enough votes." That evening, I took a walk down the property line, the sun setting gold over the fields, and thought about how long this feud had lasted. It wasn't about fences or bulls or even the HOA anymore. It was about control. Karen couldn't stand that someone like me, calm, unbothered, unshakable, existed outside her grasp. To her, I represented defiance, chaos, everything she thought she'd escaped by moving into a neatly planned community with rules about lawn height and mailbox color. The thought almost made me pity her. Almost. But pity doesn't fix problems. So I went inside, turned on my computer, and drafted an email to the HOA board. I attached the zoning compliance documents, the sheriff's warnings, and the video evidence. Then I wrote a simple message. For your records. Consider this an official notice that continued harassment from Ms. Reynolds will result in legal action. I hit send and went to bed satisfied. The next morning, my satisfaction turned into laughter when I looked outside and saw something unbelievable. Karen had rented a massive inflatable fence. It stretched across the edge of her property, bright yellow, 6 feet tall, flapping in the wind with the words, "Keep your cows away," painted in red letters. She stood next to it, hands on hips, directing 2 men as if she were fortifying a castle. I grabbed my phone, took a video, and posted it online with the caption, "When you fear bulls but not irony." Within an hour, it had 1,000 shares. By afternoon, local papers ran headlines like, "HOA lady erects inflatable wall to stop bulls." It was the funniest thing that had ever happened on this side of the county line. But Karen didn't find it funny. She called the sheriff again, claiming my mockery constituted harassment. Daniels showed up, laughing so hard he could barely speak. "Carter," he said, wiping his eyes, "I'm only here because dispatch made me. Officially, I'm supposed to ask you to stop filming her. Unofficially, keep doing what you're doing." I grinned. "I'll consider it civic education." That evening, the inflatable fence came down in dramatic fashion. A windstorm rolled through and carried it halfway into the pasture. Big Red and his buddies watched it tumble like a beach ball and stomped it flat. I stood there watching the absurdity unfold under the flickering lightning, then noticed something. Karen standing at the edge of her driveway, watching too. For a moment, she looked small. Deflated, just like her wall. When our eyes met, she turned away quickly and went inside. The following week, the town hall took place. It was packed. Farmers, homeowners, reporters, everyone who'd followed the drama. I spoke calmly, explaining the difference between agricultural and residential zoning, the importance of respecting property lines, and the dangers of trespassing near livestock. The room was quiet, respectful, until someone from the back stood and asked, "What about that woman who went viral?" I smiled. "She learned an important lesson about fences," I said. The audience laughed, the tension broke, and the council officially reaffirmed my rights as a livestock owner. When the meeting ended, several HOA members approached me to apologize for Karen's behavior. Even Greg shook my hand. "We're voting next week," he said quietly. "She won't be on the board much longer." But Karen didn't go quietly. The next morning, she plastered flyers across mailboxes warning residents of unregulated bull breeding operations endangering community safety. It was desperate and absurd, but it showed she still had fight left in her. Only this time, she'd pushed too far. The flyers violated multiple county ordinances about littering and unauthorized distribution. A few neighbors reported her, and within days, code enforcement issued her a fine. The sight of the official notice taped to her perfect white door was pure poetry. I thought that would finally end it. But Karen had one last card to play, one so audacious I didn't see it coming. Late that Friday night, my motion camera pinged again. I opened the feed expecting raccoons, but what I saw made me sit straight up. A truck idling by the fence. Headlights off. A shadowy figure near the gate with what looked like bolt cutters. The silhouette moved deliberately, snapping the chain and swinging the gate open. My heart dropped as I saw 2 bulls lift their heads, curious about the noise. I grabbed my phone, called the sheriff, and sprinted for the door. By the time I reached the pasture, the figure was gone, but the damage was done. The bulls were outside the fence, wandering toward the road. My truck's headlights caught their massive forms against the dark sky. I managed to lure them back with feed and close the gate before anyone got hurt, but the evidence was clear. This wasn't mischief anymore. It was sabotage. Someone had tried to unleash my bulls. And I already knew who. The next morning started with the kind of silence that doesn't belong on a farm. No birds, no distant hum of the road, no sound of the bulls shuffling behind the fence. Just a heavy, uneasy quiet. I stood by the pasture gate with a thermos of coffee in my hand, staring at the twisted chain Karen, or whoever she'd sent, had cut open the night before. The replacement I'd installed was thick enough to tow a tractor, and I added a heavy-duty lock for good measure. Sheriff Daniels showed up 20 minutes later in his dusty cruiser, his expression equal parts amusement and disbelief. "You sure know how to attract excitement, Carter," he said. I handed him my phone with the motion camera footage pulled up. The figure was fuzzy, but the build, the posture, the way they moved, it was unmistakably Karen. She had the same stiff gait I'd seen 100 times, like she was walking in heels even when she wasn't. Daniels sighed. "We can't arrest her on blurry footage alone, but paired with her prior complaints, this gives me enough to escalate things. I'll file for a restraining order on your behalf." He handed back my phone, then looked at the crushed grass where the bulls had wandered. "You got lucky," he said. "If they'd made it to the road, we'd be dealing with a disaster." I nodded. "That's what scares me. Not for them, for her. She's not afraid of consequences anymore. That makes her dangerous." Daniels leaned on the hood of his cruiser, chewing on that thought. "She's unraveling. Her neighbors have been calling too. Apparently she's been ranting at HOA meetings about you being some kind of rural terrorist." He chuckled. "The board's had enough. Votes tonight. You might want to keep an eye on her place after they boot her." Sure enough, that evening the HOA parking lot filled up like it was election day. I stayed home, sitting on the porch with my binoculars, watching from afar. My phone buzzed every few minutes with texts from Greg updating me. Votes in progress. Then she's arguing about bylaws. Then finally it's done. She's out. Unanimous. I exhaled slowly, a small, satisfying victory after months of madness. But relief didn't last. Not even an hour later, Greg sent another text. "She's furious. Threatened to handle this her own way." I knew what that meant. I grabbed my flashlight and walked the perimeter of the property, checking every inch of the fence. The bulls were restless, pacing in the moonlight. Big Red lifted his head and snorted at the distant hum of an engine, Karen's white Lexus creeping up the road. She stopped at the boundary, headlights off, engine idling. I stood in plain sight, my flashlight beam landing directly on her windshield. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then she revved the engine once, rolled down the window, and shouted, "This isn't over, Carter. You've ruined my reputation." I called back, calm as always. "No, Karen. You did that all by yourself." She screeched off into the darkness, tires spitting gravel. The next day, I started getting calls again, this time from a few of her former allies. They said she'd been banned from HOA meetings after showing up with a megaphone and accusing the entire board of being in on my agricultural conspiracy. Others said she'd been seen at the feed store asking if anyone sold tranquilizers. That one made me uneasy. I called Daniels again and told him everything. He promised to have a patrol car circle the property a few times each night. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was planning something bigger, something she thought would restore her power. 2 nights later, the feeling proved right. I was jolted awake at 2 a.m. by the blaring of my motion alarm, every camera on the property going off at once. I opened the feed and froze. Karen was back, this time with help. 2 men I didn't recognize stood beside her truck, one carrying a crowbar, the other a large sack that made my gut twist. They were at the gate again, fumbling with the lock. I dialed 911 instantly, my voice calm but sharp. "Trespassers on my property. Same suspect as before." Attempting to enter livestock enclosure. Dispatch confirmed units were en route. I grabbed my spotlight, turned on every floodlight I had, and stepped out onto the porch with the camera rolling. "Karen!" I shouted across the dark field. The three figures froze in the glare. "You really think third time's the charm?" She turned, face pale but determined. "You ruined everything for me," she screamed back. "You humiliated me. My house is getting foreclosed because of you." The two men looked uncomfortable, shifting their weight. "Karen, we should go," one muttered. "Shut up," she snapped. "He's the reason my life fell apart. He set me up." I stepped forward, staying behind the fence line. "You climbed over it, Karen. You filmed yourself trespassing. You called the news. You did all of it. I just existed." For a second, her face cracked. Rage, despair, maybe a flicker of realization. Then she pulled something from her purse, a flare gun. My stomach dropped. "Karen," I said carefully, "put that down." She pointed it toward the sky, trembling. "You think you can scare me with your bulls? Let's see how they like the light." Before I could move, she fired. The flare shot into the night, arcing bright red before landing right inside the pasture. Dry grass caught instantly. Within seconds, flames began to spread. Big Red bellowed, the herd scattering toward the far end of the enclosure. "Jesus Christ, Karen!" I shouted, sprinting for the hose while sirens wailed in the distance. The fire burned hot but fast, mostly contained to one corner. The bulls stayed safe, and the deputies arrived just as the last embers died out. Karen stood by her truck, hands shaking, the flare gun still in her grip. Daniel stepped out, his jaw tight. "Karen Reynolds, you're under arrest for reckless endangerment, destruction of property, and trespassing." She didn't fight. She just stared at me, her face hollow. "You don't understand," she whispered. "You embarrassed me." I looked at her and said quietly, "No, Karen. You exposed yourself." They took her away that night, her headlights fading down the road until everything went still again. The air smelled like smoke and charred grass. I walked the fence line with my flashlight until dawn, checking on every bull. None were hurt, though Big Red refused to leave the corner where the flare had landed, his eyes fixed on the blackened ground. I patted his neck and muttered, "You and me both, buddy." For a week, things were quiet. The HOA went into damage control mode, publicly disavowing her actions. Neighbors who'd once sided with her now avoided her name altogether. I got calls from reporters asking for interviews, but I declined every one. I wasn't interested in revenge or attention anymore. I just wanted peace. Still, curiosity got the better of me, and I drove by the county jail once just to see. She was out on bail, pacing near her lawyer like a caged animal, eyes darting at the cameras outside. The sight of her made me realize something important. People like Karen never truly believe they're wrong. They just find new targets to blame when reality doesn't bend their way. A few days later, Greg stopped by with an envelope. "From the board," he said awkwardly. Inside was a formal letter of apology from the HOA and a note offering to pay for the fire damage. I laughed. "I don't want their money," I said. "Just make sure the next person in charge doesn't think fences are optional." Greg nodded. "You'll get no argument from me. The board's revising our bylaws. No more interference with adjoining properties." Then he added, "Karen's moving. Her husband finally had enough." I looked up, surprised. "She's married." "Was," he said grimly. "He filed for divorce last week." For the first time in months, I slept without the motion alerts on. The bulls settled back into their routine, the grass grew over the burned scars, and the air started to feel normal again. But peace has a strange way of carrying echoes. One afternoon, while fixing the fence, I found something glinting in the dirt. Karen's HOA badge, half buried and cracked. I turned it over in my hand. The little plastic emblem that once made her feel powerful now faded and meaningless. I hung it on a nail in the barn as a reminder. Boundaries aren't just fences, they're lines you cross once and never come back from. Weeks passed, and the town's gossip moved on. The video of the bulls and the infamous flare night turned into local legend. People joked about it at the diner, kids made memes, and someone even sold novelty shirts that read, "Respect the fence." I didn't mind, it meant laughter instead of fear. As for Karen, I heard she'd left town entirely, heading somewhere down south to live with a relative. I hoped she'd find peace, though I doubted she'd recognize it if it came. That night, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, Big Red wandered near the fence again, his massive head silhouetted against the orange sky. He let out a low, steady snort, the sound of calm after chaos. I took a sip of coffee and muttered to no one in particular, "Guess we finally got our pasture back." The cicadas buzzed, the last light faded, and for the first time in a long time, everything felt exactly the way it should. But even as I leaned back and closed my eyes, part of me couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't quite the end. People like Karen don't vanish quietly. They simmer. They plot. They wait for one last curtain call. I didn't know what form it would take, but I knew this story wasn't over yet. Not until the past stopped echoing through my fence line. A month passed before the final act unfolded, and it began, fittingly, with another envelope. I found it one morning wedged under my gate latch, sealed in red wax like some medieval summons. I almost laughed, thinking it was another HOA memo that had missed its expiration date, but when I opened it, the handwriting stopped me cold. It was Karen's. The tone was unhinged but polite, the kind of calm that only comes after madness burns out and leaves something colder behind. She wrote that she had moved out of Willow Creek, that her husband had taken their house and her reputation, and that she intended to make things right, whatever that meant. The letter ended with one line that made the hairs on my arms rise. "You took everything from me, and now you'll see what it feels like to lose what you love." I stood by the fence for a long time, reading that sentence over and over while the morning sun bled through the fog. Part of me wanted to laugh it off, but another part, the part that had watched her nearly burn down my pasture, knew better. I called Sheriff Daniels right away. When he arrived, he read the letter twice and let out a long sigh. "She's out on probation," he said. "Not supposed to contact you, not supposed to come within a mile of your property. But this is her handwriting, all right." He rubbed his chin. "I'll send someone to her new address to make sure she's still there. In the meantime, lock everything down." That night I didn't sleep. I sat on the porch with a thermos of coffee, every light off, watching the road. The bulls were restless too, their low rumbles drifting through the dark. Around midnight, I saw headlights in the distance, an old pickup creeping slow, lights dimmed. It stopped just short of the bend, and for a long time, nothing happened. Then, faintly, I saw movement near the fence. A small figure, hooded, crouching by the gate. I turned on the floodlights, and whoever it was bolted into the woods. I caught a glimpse, too short for Karen, maybe a teenager, maybe one of her old helpers. But when I checked the gate, I saw fresh tool marks on the lock, and next to it, another envelope taped to the post. Inside was a single photograph. Me, sitting on the porch 2 nights earlier, coffee in hand, unaware of the camera that had taken it. Someone had been watching. By dawn, Daniels had a patrol stationed nearby. He promised they'd catch whoever was behind it, but the incident stirred something in me. I wasn't scared exactly, just tired of being reactive. Karen's chaos had defined too many of my mornings, too many of my decisions. So, for the first time, I decided to go on offense. I drove to town, bought 2 additional motion cameras, a drone, and a stack of trail sensors. I wasn't building a fortress, I was building proof. If she wanted another showdown, I'd make sure the county had a front row seat. Days went by quietly after that. The bulls settled again, the fields turned lush with early summer rain, and even the HOA seemed to collectively forget my existence now that Karen was gone. The local paper ran a follow-up article about her case, calling it a lesson in boundaries. She'd been fined heavily for trespassing and reckless endangerment, banned from HOA positions in the state, and ordered to attend therapy as part of her probation. The piece painted her as a cautionary tale of suburban overreach. I almost felt sorry for her, until I remembered that photo on my porch. Then, one humid Friday evening, my new drone's alert pinged. Movement out near the southern fence line, the one facing the creek. I switched to the live feed and saw a familiar white SUV half hidden behind the trees. The camera zoomed in just enough to catch her face illuminated by the dashboard light. Karen. She looked thinner, wild-eyed, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She was alone. I grabbed my phone, called Daniels, and told him to get there fast. He said a unit was already 10 minutes out. I stayed on the line, narrating everything I saw as she stepped out of the SUV, walked to the creek, and began dumping something into the water. Bottles, maybe chemicals. My stomach sank when I realized what she was doing. I sprinted for the pasture. The creek ran alongside the bulls' watering channel, feeding directly into their trough system. If she was poisoning it, she wasn't just attacking property, she was trying to kill living creatures. I jumped into my truck, flew down the dirt road, and cut across the field until my headlights caught her figure by the waterline. "Karen!" I shouted as I leapt out. She froze, then turned slowly, face lit by the beam. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. "They told me to stay away, but you don't understand. You made me the villain." I walked closer, keeping my voice level. "You did that to yourself. Step away from the creek, Karen." She shook her head. "You humiliated me. Everyone laughs when they hear my name now. You took everything." I gestured to the water. "And you think killing animals will fix that?" Her eyes filled with tears, but there was no softness in them, just exhaustion. "It's all I have left to take," she whispered. Before I could move, she grabbed one of the bottles and hurled it into the water. I lunged, catching her arm before she could throw another. She fought like a cornered animal, scratching, screaming, slipping in the mud. The sirens cut through the night just as we both fell to the ground. 2 deputies rushed in, pulled her up, and dragged her toward the car while she screamed. "He ruined my life." Daniels arrived seconds later, flashlights sweeping over the bottles. "Bleach," he said grimly. "Would have sickened them bad if it made it downstream." He turned to Karen, who had stopped fighting, her body shaking as if she'd finally realized what she'd done. "You're done, lady," he muttered. The official charge sheet came 2 days later. Violation of probation, attempted animal cruelty, trespassing, and vandalism. The county judge revoked her probation immediately. She was going to serve real time this round. When the deputies came to collect her SUV from the creekside, I stood there watching them haul it away, feeling no triumph, just an odd, quiet sadness. Karen had started as an annoyance, a meddling neighbor with too much authority and too little sense. But somewhere between the fence and the flames, she'd crossed a line into something darker. I didn't hate her anymore, I pitied her. In the weeks that followed, life returned to something that resembled peace. The bulls grazed without interruption. The HOA dissolved its Community Safety Committee. Greg sent me an email simply saying, "You were right." Even the county started using Karen's case in seminars about property disputes gone wrong. I got invited to speak once, but I declined. I didn't need to relive it. Instead, I focused on rebuilding the parts of my life her chaos had disrupted, replacing burned fence posts, reseeding the pasture, restoring the calm rhythm of mornings that start with coffee and end with sunset. One evening, while mending the last bit of fence near the creek, I found something shiny in the mud. It was a silver locket. When I opened it, there was a small photo, Karen and her husband, smiling, younger, happier. The back was engraved with a single word, harmony. I didn't know if she'd dropped it during the struggle or if it had washed up from her car. Either way, it felt symbolic, like a relic of who she used to be before obsession hollowed her out. I hung it on the same nail as her cracked HOA badge in the barn, a reminder that control can corrode even good intentions until all that's left is noise. Months passed, and autumn settled over the farm. The air turned crisp, the bulls grew thicker coats, and the last of the ash from the burned grass disappeared into new green growth. One afternoon, Sheriff Daniels stopped by again, leaning against his cruiser with a grin. "Thought you'd want to know," he said. "She got 3 years, no parole for the first 18 months. Should keep her far from your bulls." I nodded, unsure whether to feel relief or melancholy. "Guess that's the end of it," I said. He chuckled. "You say that now, but something tells me if she ever comes back, you'll have another story worth telling." Maybe he was right. Life has a funny way of looping back, especially when pride and obsession are involved. But for now, peace truly had returned. The farm breathed again. The sunrise came without dread. The fence, once a symbol of conflict, now stood as quiet proof that boundaries matter more than battles. I still get the occasional curious tourist driving by, asking if this was the bull pasture from the internet, and I always just smile and say, "Used to be." On the last night of fall before the first frost, I stood by the pasture one more time, hands in my pockets, watching big red grays near the far tree line. The sky turned a deep gold, the kind that makes even old scars look like they were meant to be there. The wind carried the faint rattle of the barn door and the low rumble of content animals, simple sounds, peaceful sounds. I thought about everything that had happened, about how a single entitled neighbor's obsession had spiraled into chaos, and how close it had come to real tragedy. Yet here I was, standing in the same place, unbroken, my bulls alive, my land safe, my sanity intact. I took one last sip of coffee, glanced at the horizon, and murmured to myself, "Welcome, tour's over." Then I turned back toward the house, leaving the pasture behind me, its quiet strength stretching out under the fading light, the bulls watching like sentinels over the land that had outlasted everything, including Karen.